Allow me to tell you a story, a short one, of course. I'm going to bring you back in time, or perhaps forward. I am a sophomore in my world history class. The topic? The transatlantic slave trade. The purpose for the next 75 minutes of class? Complaining about the amount of points I lost for every sentence in the passive voice. Now, I have been writing history essays since the dawn of time, but never have I had teachers who were so strict about the passive voice. The Europeans were defeated by the enslaved peoples of Denmark, -3 points. They were resisted by the Seminole tribes, -3 points. You best believe I did not use the passive voice in that class again. But just like the people sitting next to me, I didn't understand why it was so important to not use the passive voice in the context of my history essay, and even more broader, in the context of the transatlantic slave trade. Just like the people sitting next to me complaining about their C's and how they're going to switch teachers next term, I didn't care why. I just wanted out. Boy, was I ignorant. Perhaps it was the context of the transatlantic slave trade that made it click for me. How active voice can be used as a vehicle for Black agency, the very Black agency that passive voice denies. If there is one thing that being a Black, female-identifying person on this earth teaches you, it is that you have to fight for agency in any and every given space. So to all the people wondering why they lost so many points for the passive voice on that last history essay, to all the people wondering why it matters, to the old me, this one's for you and everyone else. My name is Leilani Glace. I am a high school junior, and I have a passion for grammar and being Black. Let's dive in, shall we? So the active and the passive voice are the two grammatical voices of English. Neither is inherently better than the other, but each is suited to certain types of writing, and each convey a certain message. In the active voice, the sentence's subject performs the action. The white police officer killed George Floyd. The active voice has a very clear, direct tone. It is used when you want the reader to focus on the sentence's subject, the white police officer, and the action it is doing, killing, rather than on the action's target. In this sentence, in the active voice, the white police officer has nowhere to hide. He is front and center facing his crimes. In the passive voice, however, the action's target is the focus of the sentence, and the verb acts upon the subject. George Floyd was killed by the white police officer. The passive voice minimizes the focus on the subject by putting the action's target at the beginning of the sentence and the sentence's subject, the white police officer, as the very last words you come into contact with. When put at the end of the sentence, the white police officer becomes a figment of the past. When put at the end of the sentence, the white police officer is allowed to hide from the heinous crime he has committed. But just as the active voice can be used to call out the multitude of crimes that white people have committed against Black people, the active voice can also be used to highlight Black power and remind Black people of the agency that have been historically taken away from them. I want you to take a look at another sentence. American soldiers were resisted by a Seminole revolt. Here, the passive voice construction of were resisted obscures the relationship between subject and action, between what the American soldiers did and how it impacted the Seminole Indians and vice versa. The ubiquity of the phraseology were resisted also hides the myriad of actions that the Seminole Indians took to actively plan their resistances. And in this case, the passive voice does two very detrimental things. One, it forecloses robust accountability for the American soldiers who killed thousands of Seminole Indians. And two, it disempowers and removes agency from the very Seminole Indians who actively revolted. And these detriments do not go unnoticed. Previous studies have shown that when participants read passive voice constructions, they're both less likely to blame perpetrators for their violent acts and less likely to be emotionally impacted by the sentence's content. And in this way, the passive voice both negatively influences how people emotionally engage with history and accurately recall history. So I want us to rephrase the sentence to the active voice. The Seminole Indians revolted against the American soldiers. Yes, I know there might not be a whole lot of new information in this sentence, but I want you to pay attention to how the focus of the sentence has shifted. Here's what this sentence does. It explicitly gives power to the Seminole Indians who actively revolted and fought for their rights. When I read this sentence, I remember the Seminole tribes and their strength. When I read this sentence, I remember Black agency. What do you remember? Now, I want us to apply this concept to something I am sure we are all familiar with in one way or another, racism. We often talk about racism in the passive voice. We discuss racism as if some extraterrestrial force overtakes Black people at random, lynching, wounding, mutilating, maiming, damaging, and even killing them. Who or what is doing the racism, and how or why it happens, seems non-existent. And I know it may sound absurd, but I assure you, this is exactly what it sounds like when we talk about racism in the passive voice. When we discuss racism as if it is some unnamed and unknowable force that overtakes Black people at random, we ignore the real systems where structural racism rears its ugly head. Instead of passive attributions, we must actively name the organizations that uphold racial hierarchies and eliminate them. In the words of author Rebecca Solnit, an American writer, historian, and activist, calling things by their true names cuts through the lies that excuse, buffer, muddle, disguise, avoid, or encourage inaction, indifference, obliviousness. Naming is the first step in the process of liberation. We must also use the active voice to remind Black generations for centuries to come that they can get through what often seems like an inevitable cycle of defeat and not just survive, but thrive. Our own beliefs of the passive voice sentences that we read, that Black people are politically and socially powerless without agency, holds the Black community back from so much. I promise you, we are so much more. And the few times that Black people are talked about in the active voice is when a Black person commits a crime. Take news reports, for example. According to the Center for American Progress, police officers, investigators, and detectives more frequently use the active voice to describe the actions of male African American criminals than male Caucasian criminals. And perhaps even more relevant, news outlets more frequently use the passive voice to describe situations surrounding Black murder and or rape victims, as if blaming the Black victims for their very own tragedies. This is telling. It gives hints about agency and guilt, who deserves the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't, who gets juxtaposed with their crimes and who gets distanced from them. This discontinuity is a small detail with a big importance. In a world rooted in cultural conflations of Black people and anything dangerous, angry, or inhuman, we have a responsibility to report equally in the active voice on the bad and on the good. To use active voice in our sentences when recounting Black narratives means to recognize Black agency. It means an acknowledgement of Black people and Blackness as a politically and socially capable identity. Centering Black agencies across contexts is crucial for Black people to have and experience the full human rights they oh so deserve. Yes, active voice is only one step in a deeply rooted systemic problem, but it is a step. It is a step that you can take. It is a step that your 6-year-old can take. It is a step that journalists must take. It is a step that I take every time I am tasked with any form of writing. Thank you.